My gentle and, of course, very modern apes, welcome to what is effectively Season 2 of the Library of Errors. We have moved on from Why Human Evolution is False and to our next text, which is going to be Contested Bones. You guys knew this one was coming. I'm very excited for it. It's certainly a leg up when it comes to robusticity. And it's a little bit more specific in the claims that it makes. So we're going to be doing a lot of deep diving into this tome in order to really dissect it and see why it is in fact incorrect. This series, just like the last one, will involve a lot of reading and a lot of deep dives with regard to pulling up, the browser and going through papers and things like that to really sink our teeth into the claims that are being made. Of course, that means that since we are reviewing this text for scientific accuracy, this is covered by fair use. So Dr. Sanford and Mr. Roop, I do hope that you will respect that. Speaking of our two authors, Sanford and Roop are the authors of Contested Bones. Contested Bones is a text that aims to effectively overturn all of paleoanthropology, and it should come as no surprise to you that neither Roop nor Dr. Sanford are even tangentially related to paleoanthropology as a field. Roop, I believe, has a BS in biology, I think it is, so his undergraduate degree is in biology, and that's the last degree he's gotten. Dr. Sanford is a different story. We're going to go over these guys in a second a little bit more in depth, but I think it's about time that we hit that intro, don't you? See how the surf grows. So Dr. Sanford is no laughing matter. We're not talking about your run-of-the-mill creationist here. Sanford himself is, as it's noted here, he's a geneticist. Now, critically, he is a plant geneticist, and that will come into play in a bit. He also invented the gene gun, so that's a good thing, and he's utilized, I think he might have invented Mendel's accountant. Yeah, so his colleagues developed Mendel's accountant. Now, notice it says publishing several papers on it and genetic entropy in non-peer-reviewed venues. So, as is classic, I suppose I should say, the Young Earth Creationists, while the professional ones do publish in, actual legitimate peer-reviewed journals, they never publish their creationist stuff there, which is very, very interesting. Now, we're going to be going over not so much a lot of his genetic stuff that's been done to death by others, and genetic entropy is, of course, a gigantic farce in my opinion. But it's important to note that he is a well-credentialed individual. He's just not well-credentialed for talking about paleoanthropology. All right, so this is going to involve a lot of anatomical terms and a whole lot of having a good understanding of hominin evolution, distinguishing between the hominins, and really just evolutionary theory in general. And I've read this book once all the way through before. It's annotated, but I'm reading it through again as we do these episodes, so that it's fresh in my mind. And I can tell you with certainty, this doesn't go over well for our two authors as far as being right on this stuff. Next, though, is our second author, a one Christopher Roop, Mr. Roop, who has his undergraduate education in biology. He got it from Geneseo University in 2009. This is a fine university as far as I can tell. I pulled it up over here just to see kind of what kind of school it really is. It's a state university. That's all good, whatever. You will notice, though, that in their not their fraternities and sororities, in their, let's see here, notable alumni, one Mr. Roop is not listed, right? He isn't among these greats. There's also, interestingly, very few science folks coming out of this school. Just worth noting. Back to Mr. Roop. Since his early 20s, after he felt led by the Lord to start a ministry called Back to Genesis. That's very early 2000s. Since his early 20s, he's been speaking on the topic of creation evolution in various settings, including local radio and TV stations, colleges, universities, middle and senior high schools. I don't know what that means. Teen centers, very hip. Apologetics conferences and church venues from first grade to adult level discipleship classes. So very cool. We've got the indoctrination occurring at all levels. Since the fall of 2011, Chris has been a research associate at FMS Foundation in collaboration with renowned geneticist Dr. Sanford of Cornell. As a researcher with the FMS Foundation, he's been doing numerical simulation research aimed at better understanding the historical problem of Haldane's dilemma. For those of you who might know, Haldane's dilemma is a problem if you live in the 70s, right? Biology has kind of sorted through this issue in the time since then. He also talks about fish evolution, human evolution, and how he has done a lot of work on the hominin fossil record. For the last 5 years at FMS, Chris has been researching human evolution and the hominin fossil record. He has been studying paleoanthropology in depth, which has required the study of hundreds of technical papers and dozens of related books. You hear that, guys? Dozens. According to senior co-author Dr. John Sanford of their published book, Contested Bones, Chris's research on this topic is similar in scope and depth to a PhD research project, and his enormous contribution to the writing of this book is comparable to a PhD dissertation. Now, I am currently a PhD student, and I am currently a PhD student in biological anthropology, so precisely the thing that Dr. John Sanford is comparing Chris's work to, you would get laughed out of your university after being formally expelled if you submitted something like this. Not because of what it says, because there are no methods. This is not the work of a dissertation, all right? There is no synthesis of information in here, not really. It's just a bunch of, boy, it sure seems like there are scientists that disagree on the interpretation of certain fossils. I guess that means they're not real. And if you think that sounds like a straw man, we'll get there, and you'll see what I mean. But I can tell you, as someone who is working towards a degree in this subject, that this text is if you've got a political compass, this is the complete axial opposite. This text is diametrically opposed to any kind of dissertation. It is an anti-dissertation. And again, you'll see what I mean when I say that. Now, I'm sure he has put quite a bit of work into this. That's fine. A lot of people have put a lot of work into things that are wrong or bad. See, maybe, I don't know, the Axis powers in World War II. Bet a lot of work was put into that. Doesn't make it right, right? Newton put a lot of work into his work with alchemy. That didn't make it right. You can put a lot of work into something and be woefully incorrect, which is what we're going to see. So, with all of this raring and ready to go, how about we begin? Personal Prologue by John Sanford. Why did Chris and I write this book? As a Cornell research scientist and geneticist, I was a committed evolutionist for most of my adult life. I put red flag number 1 is just this entire prologue. For most of the time, I was fully persuaded that ape-to-man evolution was a simple and obvious fact of science, but I did not hold that view based upon careful examination of the evidence. Yes, there are a lot of things in science that we take at face value if we don't study them directly and for a living. I trust that the folks behind relativity know what they're talking about. I don't feel the need to go and double-check their work, and if you were to go take it upon yourself to double-check the work of every scientist ever, you would maybe make it 1% of the way before dying of old age. There is a reason why we rely on experts. Now, you can look into these things, certainly. But to single evolutionary theory out here is already concerning. Since I only had a superficial understanding of the topic, where did my certainty come from? Like any other scientist who is outside of their field of expertise, I was primarily persuaded by the pervasive groupthink, which is especially strong within the academic community. I think that is a yes and no statement. Yes, groupthink can be strong and that it is difficult to overturn a paradigm, but on the other hand, the rewards for overturning the paradigm are bountiful. If you overturn the paradigm, that's like you're famous in academics. And in fact, peer review strives to strike down opposition if it's not well-founded. And if it is, then it becomes the norm, such as the cycle of life in academics and in science. A key component of the academic groupthink is that evolution explains everything. Okay. I didn't know evolution explained like the basics of chemistry or physics for that matter. Evolution is the cornerstone of biology, certainly, but I think he's giving it too much credit here. For scientists like myself, this overarching groupthink about evolution was powerfully reinforced by lay-level science articles and powerful visuals promoted through the mass media. This is them complaining about like the March of Progress or like any kind of reconstruction of an extinct creature. That's a real bugaboo for the creationists. They no likey that. Such reinforcement was inherently superficial, but made me feel I was never scientifically well-informed. Or I was scientifically well-informed, not never scientifically well-informed. And so I had a good reason to feel very certain. But I never took the time to actually study the relevant scientific literature. I was already certain. I am sure that many other academics have had the same basic experience. This would explain why so many academics are extremely certain of human evolution, yet have never actually studied it and have almost no grasp of the subject. My skin is going to peel off of my body from the irony loaded into that statement, because this text does nothing but reassure me, someone who is formally educated in this topic exactly, that he does have no idea and has almost no grasp on the subject. This goes mostly for Roop, not Sanford. Sanford is not the author of the majority of this book, and I'm going to continue to refresh your memory on that because Sanford should know better than this. More specifically, my certainty in human evolution was derived from my faith in the experts in the field. I assumed there was no ideological agenda. I assumed the researchers were in agreement regarding the evidence, and I assumed the experts must actually have ways of knowing for certain what happened in the very distant past. That's a loaded paragraph, but we'll take that apart as we move through the book. I was about 50 years old before I began to seriously question human evolution. My initial skepticism was not based upon the fossil record, but upon my own genetic research. I'm sure his work with plants really informed that skepticism quite well. I was learning that there are clear limits to what can realistically be accomplished by Darwinian processes, i.e., random genetic mutations filtered by natural selection. Ever since that time, 16 years ago, I have been doing original scientific research addressing this fundamental question. Can mutation and selection transform an ape into a human being? That's going to be a repeating theme in this too. Can selection or evolution transform a canine into a dog? This is the eternal question, of course. Humans are apes. We are apes. We'll get to that too, I'm sure. This is just tantalizing you with what this series is going to be like, what this season of the Library of Error will bring. This work has resulted in over a dozen scientific papers and 3 books. My research has confirmed what many population geneticists have recognized for decades. The mutation selection process has major problems which profoundly limit what it can realistically accomplish. So it's interesting because there are a lot of citations in this text. We're going to have to track down most of them. But there are no citations for these population geneticists that seem to agree with Dr. Sanford on this problem. Also, these scientific papers don't appear, at least the ones that address human evolution and mutation, don't appear to have been published in any kind of peer-reviewed journal, which is concerning. That should concern you, considering he has done conventional work. So it's not like he doesn't know how to publish stuff. It's just, wouldn't surprise me if none of it made it through peer review. Peer review is absolutely ruthless. Let's see here. It turns out that mutation selection process cannot even begin to create the large networks of new information that would be required for the genetic transformation of ape to man. Even more surprising, there is evidence that human evolution is going backward. This is that genetic entropy stuff, which I'm sure we're going to have to talk about at some point during this series, even though I've talked about it in many, many, many other videos. Because good mutations are extremely rare, while bad mutations are recurring much more quickly than natural selection can select them away. It is true that mutation selection processes are happening all the time. However, the best it can accomplish is adaptive fine-tuning, microevolution, and purifying selection, removal of the worst deleterious mutations. I put up here no proper definitions. Macroevolution includes speciation, because he's going to talk about macroevolution, I believe, here in a second. And already we're not using the right definitions. This should come as no surprise from Dr. Sanford, though, because in order to make his genetic entropy thing work, he changes the definition of fitness entirely. You know, fitness, the fundamental concept behind evolution by natural selection, like one of the 3 definitions. There is now strong genetic evidence against ape-to-man evolution. Oh, I'm so excited. Maybe we'll get to revisit more of the illustrious Tompkins' research. However, people argue that the genetic evidence must be wrong because the fossil record clearly proves ape-to-man evolution. It is for this reason that Chris Roop and I begin to carefully examine the fossil evidence that is said to prove ape-to-man evolution. For the last 4 years, we've been critically examining the evidence as reported in several hundred technical papers which describe the bones of tentative transitional forms between ape and man. Chris, a biologist, has done the lion's share of researching the relevant literature. Together, we have connected the dots and co-labored in writing this book. We have been surprised by our findings. The raw data, the bones themselves, do not show what is widely claimed. Furthermore, it is clear that most of the workers in the field sharply disagree about key discoveries. Nearly all of the important bones are contested, hence our title. They said it. They said contested bones. We will be extensively quoting the experts in the field, usually by quoting directly from their technical papers, to show that the bones really are contested. I'm very excited for this, because like I said, I've read this book before. You'll never guess some of the connecting themes behind these quote usages. It's almost like they've been mined from some of these papers, and you'll be pleased to know the overwhelming majority. I think RJ, James Downard, actually did the math on this one, but it's something like 80% of the quotes are like 1990s and before. And this text was written in like 2012, 2015, something like that. Let me see here. Oh, I'm sorry, 2017, even better. So really good stuff, but we'll get there. Neither Chris nor I have a PhD in paleoanthropology. I wrote or master's or BS. So why should you bother reading this book? Just stop. We just stop there, we put the book down, we call it a day, we're done, we're finished. If only it were that easy. Perhaps it is because of one simple fact. Fresh scientific perspectives almost never arise from established members of a given field. Outsiders are often very needed to help break free from the shackles of groupthink. Now, something I've said many times is the exact opposite of that sentence. I cannot think of a single example where a paradigm in science has been completely upended by someone who has no formal training in the field coming in and telling the people who do have the formal training that they are wrong, actually. I can't think of a single example of that. If you can, leave it in the comments. I'm happy to be proven wrong. We can tackle them one by one if there are multiple examples, but I put name one example because I was like kind of floored by the fact that he said this. The field of paleoanthropology consists of a very small group of specialists who are perhaps sometimes blinded by their shared assumptions and traditions. We do not seek to disrespect this community of scientists, but as earnest scholars seeking truth, we feel justified in examining the evidence for ourselves. I encourage that. I think that's a good attitude, genuinely. But in that same respect, in that same fashion, I feel absolutely no need to restrain myself in examining the rigor used in this text that seeks to overturn an entire field of science. If you're going to come in guns blazing like this, you better have a lot of bullets. And I can tell you, they brought a spoon to a gunfight. So, If more people outside the field examine the evidence, we feel many would agree that the fossil evidence for human evolution is surprisingly weak. So perhaps Chris and I are playing the role of these little children who are not afraid to ask the question, where are the emperor's clothes? The serious problems associated with Darwinian mutation/selection, combined with the serious problems associated with the fossil record, the discussion of which make up the bulk of this book, are sufficient for any reasonable person to question the ape-to-man story. Given the problems, it seems only reasonable to consider alternative explanations for the origin of man. What reasonable alternative explanations are possible, which might explain the origin of man? I feel like that was kind of poorly written. That last sentence. He was going so strong. So that's our prologue. I'm going to pause here. We'll see where we're at lengthwise, and chapter 1 might be separate. This is going to be longer than the previous season because there's a lot to get through. That was like 2 pages. I'm probably not going to read every sentence, but I might. So, because I'll tell you what, I'll make you this promise. I will not read like more than 1 or 2 sentences in a row that don't have something directly wrong with them. We're going to be reading the whole book. So it turns out we'd only been going for about 20 minutes. It felt like a lifetime to me. But the good news is we're going to keep going. So chapter 1 is titled The Power of the Paradigm. And it's got this, the March of Progress, right? Be concerned. The March of Progress is not used very often in paleoanthropology anymore because there's too many dadgum fossils, right? We know that anagenesis isn't how this thing works. And when I say anagenesis, I mean one population or species of organisms, one species doesn't just beget the next species and then go extinct, right? You have all of these branches. It's a tangled bush. So he begins with a quote from David Pilbeam. My reservations concern not so much this book, Richard Leakey's Origins, but the whole subject and methodology of paleoanthropology. Perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery, for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about us and ideology than about the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about humans view themselves than it does about humans came about. But that is heresy. So this is a quote that he begins it off with, basically trying he wants to, Sanford and Roop here, our authors, really, you get the feeling they really want to start sowing doubt early and live up to this name of contested bones, that all of the paleoanthropologists are arguing with each other about every single, flake of bone that has ever been dug up out of East Africa or South Africa. The problem is, this quote is from 1978. This is going to be a recurring issue, folks, because the data from 1978 compared to now, I believe we had 3 hominins, maybe 4, something along those lines. Homo neanderthalensis, Homo erectus, Eugene Dubois, Australopithecus africanus, tongue child, and I believe we had Australopithecus afarensis too at 1978. But I'm horrible with the dating for these guys, so we'll check that later. Not the dates of when they lived, the dates of when they were found, because there's so many different fossils. So I specifically put 1978 quote. For reference, we have over 20 hominins now, and just from the genus Australopithecus, we have specimens from over 400 individuals. Usually I say 300. Turns out I was 100 off. So over 400 individuals. That's a lot compared to then. Let's continue. The iconic ape parade. In 1965, natural history painter Rudolf Zallinger created the most famous icon of evolution, the March of Progress. This illustration was a fold-out in the Time, Life, Nature book, Early Man. It portrays a series of alleged ape-like ancestors that become progressively more human as they march across the page. Interestingly, the figure's caption cautioned readers that the artistic representations were based upon fragmentary fossil evidence. The book freely confesses, is the word he uses here, although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, all here are shown standing for the purpose of comparison. At the time, there was no compelling fossil evidence to suggest that so-called proto-apes evolved into man. The transitional forms existed primarily in the artist's mind. Now, early man It was published in 1965, so it's earlier than the quote at the beginning. So yes, I'm not surprised that there wasn't much to go off of. Again, we're looking at 3, maybe 4 hominins in existence, right? But critically, these hominins occupied spaces that were very clearly leading up to, from our retrospective glance, to some kind of directional movement towards humanity from a more ape-like organism, right? Yes, liberties were taken. They're taken today as well. Let's continue. Unfortunately, most people ignored the fine print because it was overshadowed by the persuasive image. A lifelong researcher of human evolution describes how the ape parade impacted Western culture. I'm going to not read this quote because it's very long. It's this entire section in blue right here under my middle finger. But you should know, as you can see from my notes, this lifelong researcher of human evolution is actually a creationist. The person who wrote it was Lubenow, author of book titled Bones of Contention. Wait a second. Hold on. So I'm sorry, but I find absolutely no merit in reading it. He basically just is mad because he thinks that too many people bought into the visual, how persuasive the visual of human evolution in the March of Progress was. So sad. There is no doubt that this mental image has been used to powerfully influence public thought, and it is now deeply embedded in the modern mind. This is so, sinister, the way that he's doing this. Talks about how it's been used for so long. Very few people are aware that virtually every reputed ape man has been contested by experts in the field. We are going to have to stop every single time he mentions something like this and bring up the fact that he is not elaborating on what kind of disagreement is going on here. More often than not, and we will be going through pretty much every hominin that has ever existed, what types of arguments are typically occurring. Usually someone comes up with some really cool find, right? Recently there was a Homo erectus skull cap found in Dremelin Dremelin Cave down in South Africa. And folks were basically like, now wait a second. What do you mean you found a Homo erectus skull cap? It's dated fairly early. It would be one of the earlier Homo erectus specimens that we had. So folks were like, okay, well, this seems pretty unlikely. Are you sure it's Homo erectus? And it wasn't until the paper itself came out, or the diagnostic paper came out very recently, that people got to actually get their eyes on it and see what the authors were actually proposing themselves. And yes, indeed, it probably is a Homo erectus skull cap. And now folks are like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, right? But Reuben Sanford would consider that to be a contention. That's how all science works. Whenever anybody brings something new to light, have you seen the dinosaur people interact? I mean, oh my goodness, it's even worse there than it is in paleoanthropology. We've written this book to simply make more people aware that the actual fossil evidence is fragmentary and it is typically self-contradicting. I underlined typically, and I guess I was just thinking, what does this even mean, self-contradictory? Contrary to what is widely believed, the fossil evidence is weak and does not provide compelling evidence for human evolution. This is like the 3rd or 4th time that this sentiment has been expressed, and we are 10 pages in. We ask you, the reader, to open your mind just a little and give us a fair hearing as we critically examine the scientific evidence that seriously challenges the popular point of view. We ask you to begin to discern between the hype on this subject and the actual science. We do not ask you to believe us based on our limited authority. We ask you to believe the actual data and writings, in blue font, from experts in the field. We trust that when you're done reading this book, you will at least acknowledge that the bones in question really are contested. We're going to see why this paragraph is a big load of hooey, because there's nothing to believe here. Whether or not we're looking at ancient quotes that are completely out of date and thus have very little bearing on the current data set of today, or quotes that are mined and cut off before they actually finish the sentiment, or quotes that are entirely misrepresented, because there are some of those too. A lot of those come from Bernard Wood, Bernard Wood too, but also Lee Berger. We get a lot from those two paleoanthropologists, and you'll never guess why. We'll get there. Human evolution the basics. I'm sure that nothing is going to be horrifically butchered here. Before we examine the problems associated with the current paradigm, we need to begin by outlining the popular science view of human evolution and by introducing some basic terminology. Blah, 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 talks about the cartoon pictures. The popularized story regarding human origins can be outlined as follows. Over 3 billion years ago, the first bacteria-like cell arose spontaneously from non-living matter. Then through Darwinian mutation selection processes, these bacteria gradually became fish, which later became apes, which later became man. I drew this little dude here, basically being like, oh, really? Fascinating. An unknown apish creature that lived roughly 5 to 10 million years ago was the common ancestor of both man and chimpanzee. The common ancestor split into 2 branches, with the chimp lineage staying largely the same. That's also a fallacy, but we'll get there. However, during the same time, the human lineage was radically transformed into modern man. We'll see how radical later. It is not thought that we evolved from chimpanzees. I did underline this. Good job, guys. That's true. The common ancestor but rather humans and chimps diverged from an unknown African ape, which is now extinct and which apparently left no bones. Oh, that's so interesting, because I've been under the impression that we've got a couple of good candidates for this potential last common ancestor, but we'll see. The evolutionary branch that would eventually lead to modern man is said to have evolved through a series of transitional forms whose bones have been recovered from various sites. The reputed ape-human intermediates, sometimes informally referred to as ape men. I've never heard anybody myself call hominins ape men in verbal conversation, like other than creationists. And I work with paleoanthropologists. And are more correctly termed hominins. Okay, the term hominin is broader than the term hominid, which refers to any human or any ape or any possible intermediate. Actually, I don't think that's right, what he's got here. Technically, yes. So really, well, okay, I guess this is fine. So hominin refers to humans, right? We are hominins, as well as every single other ape that is more closely related to us than they are to other living apes. So Australopithecines would have been more closely related to humans than they are to chimpanzees, and more closely related to us than they are to gorillas, etc., etc. Hominid refers to all great apes, so us, gorillas, chimps, bonobos, and orangutans, and then hominoid includes the gibbons. The 2 genera named Australopithecus, Latin for southern ape, and Homo, which is Latin for man, are some of the genera we're going to be talking about. There are a few other peripheral genera that have been named, which are quite clearly apes and have no clear place in the ape-to-human progression. For example, Ardipithecus is just one partial skeleton and is essentially the same as many other Australopithecus specimens and was originally classified as belonging to Australopithecus by its discoverers. Later we will describe Ardipithecus in detail, but for now we will just say that it does not seem to merit its own genus name, nor does it merit the status of hominin. That should be another huge red flag. We will talk about this later. Ardipithecus is, if it is not directly on the human line, it's a very close cousin. This thing is not just another ape, as these guys would put it. We'll get there. The study of reputed hominin bones and their artifacts, such as stone tools, is called paleoanthropology. A similar term, paleontology, is applied to the broader study of any ancient fossil remains. Paleoanthropology is a very cumbersome word, and so we will most often simply refer to it as the field. Because paleoanthropologist is a mouthful, we will often just say paleo experts or collectively as the paleo community. Okay. I think that's super cringe, and very unprofessional for a book that's overturning the paradigm, but whatever. Various bones that are claimed as hominin transitional forms have been given long Latin names, such as Australopithecus, Barroghazali. They're complaining about that, cool. Scientists and science writers often shorten these names. No, they don't. And we will do the same whenever possible. Like, they might put a Barroghazali, but they're not going to be like, this is an Australopithecus, and here are the details, right? Like, there's a reason species get nomenclature and are referred to as such. We will typically replace long Latin names with shortened forms. For example, we will use afarensis for Australopithecus afarensis, Ardi for Ardipithecus ramidus, and Hobbit for Homo floresiensis. Similarly, we will use Sediba for Australopithecus sediba, Habilis for Homo habilis, Naledi for Homo naledi, Erectus for Homo erectus, and Neanderthal for Homo neanderthalensis. Certain fossil discoveries have received so much media coverage that specific bones have been given nicknames, which we will also use, e.g. Lucy. I have specifically had an advisor in the past for my master's thesis tell me, because in an email I said afarensis, that is just impeccably unprofessional. So again, that should let you know where these guys are at. There's a reason organisms have nomenclature. There's a reason you're expected to use them. The most that you're really allowed to do is shorten the genus name. So you might be able to say A. afarensis, or A. sediba, or H. floresiensis. You can't just call it Hobbit. The story of human evolution has been under continuous revision since the time of Darwin. Yes, most science fields have been under continuous revision since the time of their inception. The traditional cartoon version of the human evolution story, which is now rejected, would say that unknown ape-like creatures evolved into Ardi, which evolved into Lucy, which evolved into Habilis, which evolved into Erectus, which evolved into modern man. Well, that's really interesting, because Ardipithecus wasn't discovered till the 90s, so how is it that these ancient cartoons are including it? They weren't, but I digress. Blah, 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 complaining about now we're calling it a tangled bush. Jacques Hublin, Jean-Jacques Hublin? Director of the Department of Human Evolution at the Max Planck Institute. Max Planck is excellent. States in the journal Nature, the once popular fresco showing a single file of marching hominids has become ever more vertical, tall, and hairless. Now it seems to be fiction. Ever more tall, let's see. The once popular fresco showing a single file of marching hominids becoming ever more vertical, tall, and hairless, so the organism is becoming that way, now appears to be fiction. Yes, that is true. That's also from the year 2000, but he is right. The march of progress is not great. We know that that Homo naledi, lived in Rising Star Cave as recently as 250,000 years ago, and this thing was pretty ape-like, in its upper body especially. More Homo-like than Australopithecine, but certainly not like what we are today. So, and probably pretty hairy. Okay, now they say Bernard Wood, they quote Bernard Wood, who says, there's a popular image of human evolution that you'll find all over the place. On the picture, on the left, there's an ape, blah, 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 talking about the March of Progress. And then he says the March of Progress is an illusion. Yes, because it is a tangled branch with a lot of contemporaneity. Once we pull up the first quote, I'll show that, and we'll talk about that too. Okay, scientific method. There are two different types of scientific inquiry that are very different. Operational science and historical science. I put wow, because that comes straight out of Answers in Genesis. Like no field that takes itself seriously that I have ever heard of makes this distinction in this way. All right? Unfortunately, many people fail to grasp the difference. It's because you made it up. Operational science is a type of science that involves conducting repeatable experiments in the present. This is classical hard science, which teaches us how nature operates and has given rise to modern technologies like computers, modern medicine, and modern agriculture. 2 out of 3 of those rely on evolutionary theory. Medicine and agriculture both rely on the principles of evolutionary theory, like in their entirety. You don't get the corn that you eat without artificial selection, which is just natural selection, but with human intention. And pretty much every antibiotic that's ever existed is rooted in evolution as well. That resistance is becoming problematic because a lot of these things are evolving to be resistant. These bacteria are evolving to be resistant to our medicines. So, oh boy, okay. So a popular scientific or popular biology textbook provides a good definition. Scientific inquiry is a powerful tool to know nature, but there are limitations to the kinds of questions it can answer. These limits are set by science's requirements that a hypothesis must be testable and falsifiable, and that the observations and experimental results must be repeatable. That is true, 100%. Except you can do all of those things with fossils. And if you think you can't, then you might as well throw out astronomy and geology while you're at it, because all of these things involve looking at something in the present and using it to help make predictions about what happened in the past. And then the more you find, the more you know if those predictions will come to light. It's that simple. Okay. Historical science is a type of science that deals with questions about the past. If it is in the recent past, it's often called forensic science. I'm sure they think that it's not good. Historical science is a soft science because it can't be repeated and is generally not accessible through experiments conducted in the present. Again, I'm sure the astronomers And the geologists will be thrilled to hear that they are working in a soft science. Historical science is inherently uncertain, and inferences are strongly affected by presuppositions and personal prejudice. Historical science routinely goes beyond the defined limits of the scientific method. Ernst Mayr, a renowned evolutionary biologist from Harvard, explains this critical distinction between historical and operational science. Evolutionary biology, Mayr says, in contrast with physics and chemistry, is a historical science. The evolutionist attempts to explain events and processes that have already taken place. Laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for the explication of such events and processes. Instead, one constructs a historical narrative consisting of a tentative reconstruction of a potential scenario that leads to the events one is trying to explain. This is from Darwin's Influence on Modern Thought Darwin's Influence on Modern Thought from 2009, but it's actually from 1999. So it's significant. It's actually 10 years older than its publishing date. I actually had to go to the website that's listed here and then track it down. The original was from 1999. Now, I've actually never heard anybody who isn't a creationist use some of the phrasing that's in here. The historical science is new to me, and so is, what was the other one? Evolutionist. But this was also a time when things were pretty tumultuous between creationists and evolutionists. Mayr understood that when it comes to evolutionary biology, i.e. ape-to-man evolution, scientists construct a story or narrative about what they believe happened in the past. Mayr described this man-made history as a tentative reconstruction, meaning it is subject to change whenever the theorist feels it is necessary. Or wait a second, how about when new data comes to light? What do we think? I mean, again, this applies to geology and astronomy as well. Okay, the basic concept of ape-to-man narrative was constructed during the time of Darwin 150 years ago. It was accepted as fact long before any significant hominin fossils were found to validate the theory. That is not true. Darwin lived to see Neanderthals, and very shortly after Neanderthals, Eugene Dubois made his way over to Java and found Homo erectus. Very shortly after these two guys were doing their things, or these two finds were becoming significant, we began to actually have folks go to Africa. Now, why did it take so long for people to go look in Africa where humans actually evolved? Because people were super freaking racist back then, and no one could conceive of the fact that humans would evolve anywhere but Europe, right? No one could conceive of it. And if you go back and read the writings, that's exactly what the sentiment is. We, along with, I jumped a lot. Okay. The bones have always been interpreted in the light of the widely accepted ape-to-man story. This is very significant. It means that the science of paleoanthropology is not merely a matter of digging up fossils and describing what they look like. I can tell you for a fact that is exactly what it is. For someone who claims to have read hundreds of technical papers, I am shocked to hear this sentence from them. Speculations, assumptions, and inferences about the unverifiable past play a pivotal role in how hominin bones are interpreted. I put, this is telling. Does this apply to paleontology as well? Okay, taxonomy. Assigning bones to specific species, i.e. making taxonomic distinctions, in our opinions, should be based off of obvious similarities and should be consistent with common sense. Very scientific, super robust. I'm going to read that again because that is so offensive to anybody who gives, a single shit about science. Assigning bones to a specific species, in our opinion, should be based on obvious similarities and should be consistent with common sense. Okay, very rigorous. However, taxonomists have a great deal of artistic license when taxonomic groupings are typically defined on who has the most influence in a given biological arena. That is so bonkers. There is no basis to that. And if we really want to go with that obvious similarities and common sense, humans are apes, guys. Carl Linnaeus knew this. The father of taxonomy, a creationist, knew this. In fact, he was embarrassed to note it. He was scared to actually say, yes, humans are apes. So instead, he elevated monkeys and apes to anthropoids, or not anthropoids, anthropomorphs, something along those lines. He elevated them to our level instead of degrading the human form. Okay, then he talks about lumpers and splitters. He talks about how if splitters didn't know about dogs, like basically splitters want to have more species, lumpers want to lump species together. And so they talk about how if splitters didn't know about dogs, that they would just accidentally make every breed a different species. I would imagine that lumpers would do that as well. Dogs are a very unique case because humans are guiding their selection, right? So they haven't actually had time to reproductively isolate themselves. Then they talk about how splitters would say there are many different species of baboons. There are 5 different species of baboon, seven depending on who you ask. And then he says, if the casual observer were to look at these different species, they would likely make no distinction and call them all baboons without hesitation. We'll look at a picture of that in a second, because if you want to lump a homidrized baboon with a kin to baboon, okay, but that's not zoologically consistent. Okay, if scientists tend to arbitrarily split species that are alive today, imagine the potential for making this error based off of a handful of bone fragments. Oh boy. So species are arbitrary, full stop. It's a human concept. Species aren't real, okay? We define species because it allows us to categorize organisms in a way that makes sense to us, but they're not real. Species aren't a real thing. It's not like an organism is like, there's an actual biological process that is like, it is called speciation. There's a reason why it's so hard to get biologists to agree on what a species is and what the process of speciation looks like. Not the fact that it occurs, it's just when it's occurring, at what stage is the organism fully speciated. The concept of ring species throws a wrench into this as well. Okay, the problem of lumping or splitting is addressed by famous paleo expert. Every time I read paleo expert, like 10 minutes are taken off my life. Okay, and what if many of these bones are fragmented, disordered, or broken? This is a quote from Lee Berger. The scientist now faced with the most taxing jigsaw puzzle. If experts argue on how to lump or split certain clear human and non-human, think of how difficult it is to map out what once laid between us, referring to the remains of ape-human intermediates. I put, this regards species, not transition. So what Lee Berger is saying here, he says, the scientist is faced with the most taxing jigsaw puzzle. If experts argue over how to lump or split clear human and clear non-human, think of how difficult it is to map out what once lay between us, referring to the remains of ape-human intermediates. The analogy here would be if I presented you with a color gradient and I showed you red and pink. There are cultures in this world that consider pink a variation of red. They would look at that and they would say, it's all red. These would be the lumpers. The splitter, like here in the West, would say, no, there's clearly 2 colors. There's pink and there's red, right? Showing you those 2 discrete colors would lead to those 2 discussions. Now, what if I showed you a color gradient of red to pink and pink to red? This is what Lee's talking about. When you have the gradient, it's even harder to draw the line between pink and red because you see all the intermediate stages and those are even harder to classify. Okay, when a paleo expert finds a new bone, there's a strong motivation to become a splitter, to have their discovery be a new and important species. That's actually true. And then we've had this recent issue with Homo bodoensis, of all things. It's that no one even found a new thing. They were just like, yeah, let's rename some old hominins and call them Homo bodoensis. But I digress. That's another thing that we're going to be talking about. Disagreements in the field does not mean the field is invalid. We're going to have to throw out every field of science ever if that is the case. So scientists, paleoanthropologists disagreeing, right, on certain aspects of certain fossil finds doesn't invalidate the field and it doesn't invalidate human evolution. Instead, it adds robusticity to it because everyone is acting as a check and balance on each other. Okay. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Donald Johanson mentions, and everybody who's looking for hominins, there's a strong urge to learn more about human line started. He basically quotes all these people. And after the Lee Berger quote, here, which was number 8, the one I read, here is, and after the Bernard Wood quote, which is critics of the Bushy family tree have charged paleoanthropologists as being overzealous in identifying new species, presumably out of a desire for fame and further research funding. So Wood is basically saying, this is something we get accused of. I don't know why they included that quote, but they did. Anyways, after that quote, here are the dates of the quotes in the rest of this page. We have one from 2005, then one from 1981, then one from 1990, then one from 2003, then one from 2016, which we'll read, and then another one from 2003. So, Bernard Wood, number 14, notes, let's find it here. You're going to have to give me a second. That's 13. Hominin taxic diversity, fact or fiction. That's the title of a paper where Wood outlines where the lines are drawn in hominin species. But Roop and Sanford are using the title of a paper that I guess they haven't read to back up this idea that there's like this huge contention on like, is human evolution happening? Instead, what everybody's disagreeing on is what constitutes what on the color gradient, right? When you can't tell if something's human or not, it becomes very difficult to create discrete categories if you've got something all the way along the line from non-human to human. Okay, then he says, these guys, Roop and Sanford, consider themselves to be lumpers. They think lumpers are more realistic. They say extreme splitters would subdivide dog breeds into many species. Lumpers would say that all canines, wolves, dogs, coyotes, dingoes would be the same species. Biologically, this is reasonable because all canines are infertile. No, they are not. Maned wolves can't mate with any of these other guys. Maned wolves can't mate with dogs. Maned wolves can't mate with coyotes or dingoes. They can't do it. So that's also just not correct. And then they go, this is consistent with the biological species concept, the most widely accepted definition of species. If you're teaching high schoolers, that is true. But ask any biologist what they think of that. I encourage you to do so. Email your local biologist and ask them if they think the biological species concept is a good and realistic way of explaining how species work. Okay, when we classify different forms of life, the lowest category is species, blah, 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 blah. He's talking about more about species designations. In a very real sense, species designation is a matter of taxonomic taste. Species designations are largely artificial man-made categories. That's true. So then why is this so difficult for them to grasp? Within the hypothetical family tree of modern man, there are really only two meaningful genera. The first genus is Australopithecus, Latin for southern ape. This genus is extinct, and while we find many variations within these bones, all of the Australopithecus bones seem to reveal an animal type that is very similar to living apes, such as the chimpanzee. This is perfectly consistent with the name of the genus. Second genus is Homo, Latin for man or human. The Homo type is consistently seen as being distinctly human, regardless of whether or not we are talking about living people or the bones of people who lived long ago. Again, this is in perfect keeping with the genus name. This creates a serious evolutionary problem because there is no intermediate transitional genus. One genus is clearly ape-like, the other genus is clearly human-like. The large anatomical gap between the two kinds is very striking. For this reason, paleo-experts wish to bridge the gap, or are eager to find an Australopithecus bone that seems to be more human-like or Homo bones that seem to be more ape-like. This tension will become apparent as we begin to examine the most recent fossils. So I put here in parentheses because this paragraph is very important conceptually, and we need to talk about it. I put evolutionary theory would not predict this. Evolutionary theory wouldn't predict this weird anagenesis style idea that's being proposed by Sanford and Roop here. Anagenesis is like pretty out of vogue. But more importantly, yes, there are two distinct genera, Australopithecus and Homo. There's also Paranthropus, Ardipithecus, Auroran, Sahelanthropus, and Kenyanthropus. I wonder which ones we'll talk about. We'll see. I know we talk about some of them, but we'll get there. But here's the issue with this idea. Australopithecus includes all Australopithecines, from the very basal Australopithecus anamensis all the way up to Australopithecus sediba. Sediba has significantly more human-style traits than does Australopithecus anamensis. The guy who discovered it, Lee Berger, wanted to call it Homo sediba when it was first unearthed. That's how derived it appeared to be. Okay? Now, on the opposite side of that is early genus Homo, which some paleoanthropologists today think should still be Australopithecus because of how basal it is compared to the rest of Homo. So this means that within Australopithecus, you have very derived Australopithecines that some people think belong in Homo. And in early genus Homo, which is smack dab beside late genus Australopithecus, you have very primitive looking genus Homo who some people think belong in Australopithecus. So what you've got is this massive overlap of hominins that are perfect transitionals between the two genera. That's the issue here. And to solve this issue, this issue for creationists, what Sanford and Roop have done is simply pretended that these hominins in the middle aren't real hominins. And the way they do this, and we will cover this to death, is by saying that they are a mixture of Australopithecus bones and human bones. Here's the problem with that. Some of them are found in articulation with one another. So the bones that are derived, which Sanford and Roop will say are human bones, a part of the human bone bag, like the hands of Australopithecus sediba, are in articulation with the lower arm, the radius and the ulna, which is in articulation with the upper arm, the humerus, which is in articulation with the shoulder. That upper arm is primitive. It's considered ape by these guys. But it's in articulation. It's found like that in the ground. They don't address this, but we will get there in depth a bit more later. So that concludes chapter 1. I'm going to stop us here because the next chapter is titled, it's just delightful. It is titled Theory in Crisis. Ooh, spooky. And I'm excited to get to it. The reason, it's actually very short, so we could do it, but honestly, there's a lot to unpack in that little chapter. So we'll save that one for next time. So my gentle and modern apes, buckle in, because this is going to be a very, very fun season of the Library of Errors, and I can't wait to share with you the absolute miscarriage of science that is contested bones. And the abomination that occurs when you decide to write a book in an area that you are not even tangentially related to. There's a reason why this doesn't happen a lot, and when it does happen, it's usually pseudoscientists. I want to make something clear. I don't have anything against Christopher and Sanford, Christopher Roop and Dr. John Sanford personally, but I do have a lot against this text. So this is going to be a very sassy season. I hope you will forgive me for that. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.